I mean, a couple of years ago, I think they had something like 140 scouts. So I think it was 50 full-time and 90 casual. And so I think they're only at about 80 now, actually. So even before Ratcliffe, I think United were adjusting the numbers that were being brought into the club in terms of scouting.
We said in the article, United have a global army of around 80 scouts, and Ratcliffe has made it clear he feels this number is too high. Is that in comparison to other clubs? Do you know?
I think it is more than other clubs. Yeah, I think hopefully I'm not speaking out of turn, but I read somewhere that maybe Liverpool have like 15 or so.
15.
Yeah. So obviously there's different ways of maybe counting them.
Well, those 65 are really pulling their weight in the last 10 years. Yeah. Hello and welcome to Stretford Paddock. This is Inside United with Laurie Whitwell from The Athletic, as always, of course, and Jay Mott is here as well, as always, of course. How are you?
I'm good, man. This is like the highlight of our fortnight.
We love it.
It is, honestly.
Laurie.
Get so excited. We're like, Laurie's going to come back in. He's going to tell us what's going on at United, and he's going to give us a bit of optimism as well.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
You can do it. There's so much to talk about. So I want to talk about transfers, obviously. It's all heating up. Cunha, Delap, other names as well. Those two seem to have taken, especially Cunha, seems to have taken a big step forward since we last had you on, although you did speak about him last time you were on. Also, you've had an article about sackings and more cutbacks at Manchester United, this time in the sort of scouting department and in and around those areas. I want to talk about that and how that will affect the transfers and, basically United's sort of how we're looking at things going forward in that area. Also a little bit on this week. We've got a big week coming up, a season-defining week potentially. Thursday to Thursday we'll basically decide if United are in a final and have a season to look forward to or whether everything's over and done with. There's loads to talk about. Let's start with some transfers because I think it's a nice place to begin. Again, it could be a bit of optimism. I want to start with Matheus Cunha because that's the one that I think the last time you came on, or certainly recently when you came on, you spoke about United's interest in Cunha. Yeah. It was something that was an active thing at the time. And since then, in the last week or so, there seems to have been sort of big steps forward taken on that front in terms of more contact. Now reports that Cunha wants to come and that basically United want to get this deal wrapped up quickly. Where are we currently at with that deal? And sort of how do you see things unfolding over the next sort of few days or weeks?
Yeah, it has felt like significant strides have been made with talks between Cunha's representatives and Manchester United, described as very positive from what I'm being told. And so that leads me to believe that once they are hopefully agreed from United's point of view, then it's a case of triggering the clause that he's got in his contract. And obviously that just makes things a lot simpler, knowing the parameters of a deal. And okay, it's £62.5 million. It's not insignificant, but Wolves are open to instalments and United can obviously spread the cost of that transfer in terms of the accounting over the course of the contract. So you assume sort of a 5-year contract, whatever. Yeah. It feels like there's a willingness on both sides to do it. I think Wolves are accepting of the reality of the situation. They obviously put that clause in his contract in January, so they knew that this was an eventuality at some stage, probably even as soon as this summer really, because it was a lot of talk about him leaving in January. So from their point of view, the negotiations have been done in terms of what they want for the player, and now it's a case of United, I guess, agreeing those terms with him. Clearly, he is open to it because otherwise, why would they be having these kind of talks? There's other clubs, I think, in the mix, but it feels like United is the strongest connection at the moment. And let's see how quickly they can do it. Obviously, the transfer window opens on June the 1st, and I do feel like United are at a point where they appreciate the hierarchy that Ruben Amorim needs to be supported in the transfer market, because so far all he's had is Patrick Dorgu and Aiden Heaven, who has surpassed expectations, although obviously he's been injured. So this would be a kind of statement of a player who's ready-made for the Premier League, is in form. I know he's obviously had that suspension, but he's come back and he's got a free kick at Old Trafford and they scored from, and he's 2 assists and a goal in his last game at Molineux. So he's obviously a player that feels like he's ready to take that next step. He's obviously said that himself. It was interesting to me whether they would start him too much, Wolves. You're sort of thinking you don't want him to get injured, but at the same time he might be like, I want to be playing so I can really totally solidify this move that I want. But it feels like they're in a decent place at the moment, both him and the club. So it's clearly one that United are pursuing.
How sort of relevant is that instalments? How important is that? The fact it's instalments, because we know, don't we, about the finances at United, or the struggles we've got, the issues we've got, and it feels like if you can spread that out, that must make it so much easier for this deal to get done.
Well, this is it. So I sort of thought from initial soundings that it might be one where they'd have to make sure they sold at least one of those players that are on the periphery. Sancho, Rashford, Antony, even Malacia maybe, just to make sure they had enough money in the bank to actually go and complete something like this. I don't think it's actually dependent on that. Really, because as I say, the cash levels is one thing. United actually having the money to do this kind of thing, and they are obviously in debt, and a lot of the cash that they do have is because of that debt. So I think they've got something like 95 million in cash, but it's basically borrowings, and then they've also got the revolving credit facility, the credit card, where I think they've got another 90 million or something on that. So obviously the cash is kind of technically there. It's just then obviously not spending so much that you then leave yourself short in future, and they need to be making profits so that they can pay it back. And then obviously the subsequent thing is the PSR, the FFP, making sure they're in line with that, and that's where the amortisation comes into it. So I thought they might have to have some kind of sales to make sure this kind of purchase would be okay, but I think actually the calculations have been done and they feel like they're okay with going ahead with it, regardless of then what happens later on in the window, and other transfers maybe would then be dependent on the sales.
Just a bit of clarification, because not everyone will know this. Bizarrely, the transfer window this season, like you mentioned, opens on the 1st of June until the 10th of June, then closes for a week, and then reopens on the 16th of June before closing on the 1st of September. Like, have you ever been to France where you try and get a sandwich at 1 p.m. and they're just closed for lunch? Have you ever had that situation before?
You obviously have.
Yeah, I've had it. You get up at 6 a.m. and you can get anything you want. If you go for lunch at some place, like 2 people like, no, we're closed till 4. You're like, I've never seen this, but we're doing that with the transfer window. So
are you thinking that United are going to get hangry in that period in between the two transfer windows?
Yeah, exactly. So weirdly, I don't know why they're doing this. Is it to accommodate the Club World Cup?
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. So it's open for 10 days, closed for a week, and then open for 2 months essentially.
Yeah, because there's a finite amount of days that a transfer window can be open for, according to FIFA regulations, and England wanted to align with Europe in terms of the actual final close date. So yeah, but they obviously with the Club World Cup going on, I think they wanted it closed for a period where clubs are then competing in this tournament. It's obviously very important, and all the big teams are in.
Yeah, everyone can't wait for that. Did you see about the bidding for that, by the way?
For the Club World Cup?
The Club World Cup. So apparently, again, this is based on internet research that I've done. I've not
bring it to the table.
Here. So they wanted to sell the Club World Cup to TV, obviously, because it makes money and all that, brings eyes to this new tournament. I think ITV bid something like £1 because Sky didn't go for it, or I don't think Sky went for it. BBC, I don't think were bothered. ITV bid £1. And then DAZN bid £1 billion. And DAZN, again, this is entering sort of conspiracy theory here, but I think I don't want to go into the next step of this because it is where it becomes like, who's paying who for this? But apparently DAZN had some money recently from someone that kind of maybe FIFA owed a favour. And then they got the World Cup in 2034. But it does seem to be a very interesting... There's
your next article.
Please don't make me comment on that, right? No, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Nothing remotely about
Laurie's
what's going on there.
Unpick the bones of that in his next article.
I think it will be televised on DAZN, is the Club World Cup, but United won't be there. Look into that yourselves, and I should definitely look into it more. Let's move away from that. There's been a lot of talk on Cunha about getting this deal done quickly, getting this done early. Is that because United want to look more competent, or is that because when is it in June when this sort of financial year resets and we have to go again for FFP? Do we want to get this done in the last 3 years worth of accounting? Do you know anything about that? Is it
that's probably a factor in it all. Cause June the 30th, isn't it, where all that kind of jury pokery occurs. I just think generally they want to show support for a guy that's obviously had a very difficult period of time and feels like he needs new players to fulfill the kind of formation, the system, the style of play that he wants. Clearly Cunha's played that number 10 role for Wolves in that 3-4-2-1, so there's a tessellation there, and so in previous years, they've obviously had to, wait a bit. Højlund came in when they were already on pre-season tour. He never went to the US, did he? Under Ten Hag, when that was clearly, a centre forward was somebody that they needed to get in, quickly in that in that window. So yeah, I think they obviously tried to do. They did Xerxes pretty soon last year, didn't they? Again, he had a release clause. So I think if they can go and do these deals, they feel like there's a reason to do it. I mean, obviously Xerxes, for example, there was a little bit of an issue, wasn't there, where he came. And I think he had to lose a bit of weight, to be honest, when he first came to United. And so I guess they were thinking, now in this situation, if we can get players in early, because they had the Euros then that you had to wait and sort of play in and come back after that. So if they can actually do a deal with the right players that they want now, get them in ready for pre-season so Amorim can work with them, then obviously that's ideal. And there probably is some kind of PSR calculation as well involved.
Yeah. Just because I feel like I've backed myself into a corner here. 5 days ago, The Guardian did an article about DAZN paying a surprise $1 billion
surprise
amount.
That's a nice surprise.
That appears to have been largely funded by Saudi Arabia's public investment fund.
Yeah.
Okay, so that did happen. I wasn't making that up. And then shortly after that, it was announced that they would host the World Cup. Those two things may not be linked whatsoever, but
it all seems
a slightly interesting.
You can see the thread there, can't you?
Things
to me,
and that was from The Guardian.
Nothing to see here.
Nothing to see here
whatsoever.
Okay, there we go. So I didn't want to. Fair enough if the connection isn't legitimate, but I didn't want to have completely made all of that up.
This is the exact format for them to workshop ideas.
Yeah, let's just conspiracy theories. Can I change tack slightly?
Yeah, let's talk about Delap and that.
Well, I was going to ask you about Cunha, but let's move on.
No, go on.
No, I just thought, like, Scholes did his article, didn't he? And see when he was sort of saying about Cunha, and he's a good. To be fair, he said he's a good player and he scores loads of goals, but he said, where does he fit in? And he's not a centre forward, he's not a winger. And I thought, surely he fits perfectly into this system.
Yeah, I would have thought.
Yeah,
that's what he's been playing.
I was
carrying the ball.
I just thought, like, I was a bit surprised that Scholes had those reservations somewhat. I think maybe it's just more of a general thing, but when he mentioned about the positioning, I just thought, well, for me, unless I'm missing something, I think he fits in perfectly.
It seems to me to do that. I mean, I think maybe he also made a point, didn't he, of any player coming to United.
Yeah, he did say any player this side so poor. Which right, okay. What's the answer to that? Then just don't buy anyone.
Well, that's it. We had this conversation last time, didn't we? Where we basically also said, United are in the market now where they can't really buy perfectly formed, absolute guarantees of success. They have to take players that are maybe, got some element to them that is a little bit of a gamble.
Yeah.
But I think he's. Cunha, look at his goals record, his assists, his quality clearly is there. He would raise the level, I think, of United starting lineup. So you can see why they're pursuing it. Obviously, there's that question about can he then bring it to United? Will he then take that jump to make it his own, or will he? I don't know. Will there be some kind of issue around him being at United? But he seems like a pretty confident character, so hopefully he embraces it.
I saw an interesting stat the other day. Now he's got 15 goals, Cunha, and that's equal most of any Brazilian in the Premier League.
Yeah.
That's quite surprising. I think it's Firmino and Martinelli.
In a single season.
In a single season, Which surprised me. You'd have, no Brazilians ever scored 20 league goals in the Premier League. That's quite shocking, really, isn't it? Obviously, I don't know why that would be, but that is the case. So he's obviously a very good player, and I think, like you said, Jay, it's clear where he would fit. Kind of doing the Garnacho role or doing the Ahmad role in that number 10 area. He can carry the ball well, but probably more of a goal threat than either of them, if we're honest. I think that makes complete sense.
What was the situation with Costa? Was he Brazilian, but he played for Spain?
Yeah, so maybe he doesn't count then.
Yeah. So that because I always thought he was Brazilian, but he played for Spain. But I might be getting that completely wrong.
No, that is true.
Yeah,
he's born in Brazil, but played for Spain.
But I get your point. Not Brazilian international.
But he also played for Brazil.
Right, because I remember going to that. At the Spain? I was in Brazil for the Spain Holland game where Van Persie scored that header, and he was getting stick like you wouldn't believe, because a lot of Brazilians obviously in the stadium. They just hated him.
Yeah, and in the 16-17 season he did get 20 Premier League goals, and in the 14-15 season. So it depends how you want to look at it. But he's a Brazilian national, but not a Brazilian international.
Yeah,
we're really drilling down into this stat here.
Sorry, I was just curious. Sorry,
it's good.
It's good.
Holding things to account here.
Well, we can't just throw out conspiracy theories willy-nilly on air.
Guardian.
This episode of Inside United is brought to you in association with Huel. We have got a special offer on. If you visit the link in the description, huel.com/Stretford Paddock, you get £10 off for new customers and a free gift. So go and check out the link in the description. That's huel.com/Stretford Paddock. Get £10 off your first order and a free gift. Now, I've been giving Huel a go, and there's loads of benefits for it as well. It's a healthier alternative alternative, for example, to fast food, especially if you're on the go and you're in a bit of a rush. It's a sort of nice, tasty meal where you don't have to do much prep or anything like that. You can just get it on the go, and it's also got vitamin C, which can help with your immune system. There's a load of different flavours. You can see we've got chocolate, there's vanilla. My personal favourite is strawberry banana. I do like this one. It is nice and tasty. It's the one I do like them all, to be fair, but this is my personal favourite, strawberry banana. Don't mind if I do. So go and check out Huel. Listen, we're all looking after ourselves. We're all trying to find what are the best options to have sort of food on the go or a meal on the go or even a drink on the go. And this is a great option for you. Like I said before, there is a link in the description. If you go and visit huel.com/Stretford Paddock, you get £10 off your first order and a free gift as well. And anyone who follows me on socials know I am trying to keep fit and trying to do things the right way, and Huel is a great way of doing that. So check out the link in the description, and a big thank you to Huel for sponsoring this podcast.
What is the latest with Liam Delap as it stands?
Just that he is obviously a player that United are, I think, prioritising for that centre-forward role now. He's got the release clause, which is now active because Ipswich are down, right? So, but he will have options himself. So I think the idea is that it's the same deal for everybody, in terms of transfer fee, agent fee. I'm not sure exactly about the personal terms. Maybe they do change depending on which club it is, but I think there's probably broad numbers that they would look for. So it's up to him really once the season's finished and once the clubs come to the table in a clear way with proposals where he wants to go. I think he's in that kind of strong position really. Yep. So does he want to go to Man United where it's going to be potentially a bit of turmoil or some kind of situation to work out? Obviously the Champions League question mark is there. That'll become clearer clearly in the next week or so, next couple of weeks at least. But or does he want to take a step where there's a club that maybe is not the scale of United but maybe also has a good level of quality, say Nottingham Forest, for example, they might well be in the Champions League, so that's but it's more of a stepping stone almost, even though they're finishing higher than United this season. Perhaps the scrutiny won't be as high. Well, it won't be at Nottingham Forest. I think regular football is one of the big factors. Like, he wants to be playing every week, right? He's had that at Ipswich, and so I think he's at a level where he can demand that really. So yeah, all those considerations will be brought into play. Chelsea are the other team clearly that are in for him, aren't they? So yeah, what will their circumstances look like and what will their proposal be? I think he's able. He's done well this season. Okay, it's one season, but I think the fact that they've got this release clause does make him a lot more of an appealing target for a lot of clubs.
I'm just hoping that the fact that he should be a starter for United is going to be enough for him, because I think with Chelsea, I know Nicholas Jackson's not had. He had a bit of a barren spell, didn't he? But he usually starts when he's fit, and I think he'd probably be their first choice striker, wouldn't it?
It feels more that he's established, whereas the Højlund, situation is just. I know he scored at the weekend, and you could see how much it meant to him.
Well, he said he posted on it on
Instagram,
didn't he? So,
what do you guys think of that?
I saw your piece, and you sort of.
We just debated it.
You did. You spoke about it, and you said like. I can't remember how you worded it, but it was like, that might not have been gone down as well as I can't remember.
I just kind of was thinking, is that the thing to do straight away in the dressing room? Maybe leave it like, I don't know, a few hours or something. Yeah.
I'll be honest with you, I initially saw it, it kind of made sense to me.
Yeah,
I kind of get where he was coming from, because he was saying, look, it's not, he wasn't going, this is an amazing result, everything's rosy. He kind of alluded, he mentioned the fact that, you want to win or whatever, but this meant a lot to me. I think fair enough. I saw some of the reaction was a bit negative, but I get it, and I feel sorry for Højlund, and this is one of the issues I've got. You shouldn't be feeling sorry for your number 9, but I do, because you can see he's had the weight of the world on his shoulders. He looks deflated. He looks angry with some of his teammates at times. He's obviously struggling, and to get that 96-minute equaliser, he said it himself, meant a lot to him. So I get it. I do understand. And plus, he is a bit like one of them, and he does post a lot on Instagram and stuff. Do you remember, like, we all loved it when he was doing it to Kyle Walker at the Derby, didn't we? And stuff like that.
If you look at
also
the
Harry Maguire
context
with
of the
his semi.
season, you have to look like people. I saw people, and people always do this of like, if Rashford had posted that, and it, probably would be different. But look at the context. Like, this season in the league is just so dead. It's not. If that draw was to stop us going fourth or going first,
Yeah, sure.
obviously
Yeah.
you'd be like, what are you doing?
Fair
but
point.
it's, we either would have been 15th or 14th.
Yeah.
Like I think he said, not the result we wanted, but I really needed that.
Yeah.
I think we all know he's thinking bit of confidence for the Bilbao
Hugely.
game. Like and I think maybe, like you said, it's a bit like putting yourself before the team to a certain degree, but also no one sat here thinking that game in particular was a massive game for Man United.
No.
And I think we have to look at the whole context of his career, Man United season, before we want to hate something or go, well, if Lingard had said that or whatever. Well, yeah, maybe people do get treated unfairly, but why do we want to treat Højlund extra harshly just because someone else was treated extra harshly? I don't see the point in that either.
I don't mind the sentiment necessarily either. It was just more... You obviously get this environment where players go on the phone straight away in the dressing room and he's posting about it. So I'm just like, do you not want to, I don't know, be with your teammates and talk about the game amongst yourselves before you posting? Okay, people do have social media managers, but I think
he seems to do his own, doesn't he? Because the stuff is like that Maguire one was meant on it,
and they obviously the semi one.
The semi one.
Yeah. No, he is.
I love that. Him and Ahmad's as well is another one who's.
Ahmad's, but that's it. So we all, and I like. I mean, that was.
Yeah, he is on Hinge, which is great. It's great to see.
I think he does that one himself, maybe.
Ahmad,
something.
Yeah, it would be bizarre. If
did you see where he said someone asked, "Is this your own account?" He went, "No, it's Amarim's."
I mean, Amorim clearly left Højlund on for that moment, didn't he? Like, in the hope of that moment, right?
Yeah.
Like he's trying to play him into some kind of form because he is the guy for Thursday.
Well, he said it on the watch long. Was like, if anyone could get a goal now, you'd want it to be Højlund.
Yeah.
You'd want him to get that confidence.
And that kind of goal, close range.
Poacher's goal.
Obviously, Poacher's goal, deliberately did it. It was a good touch to have.
Yeah, it was. We'll come back to Højlund in a little bit in terms of his future, but back to Delap before we move on. Who else does want him then? So you mentioned Forest sort of loosely there. Obviously Chelsea, I feel like, I'm not saying you're making it up, but I feel like you can put Chelsea's name next to any half decent player in Europe and they're probably going for it. Is there any other names that you're aware of that United are sort of having to fight off here?
I'm trying to think. I think actually Bayern Munich, Vincent Kompany's had a look. I just think any Premier League team that is looking for goals has made kind of inquiry to that end, and so, but obviously it's then, have you got the money, and then also have you got the attraction for the player himself? So
30 million is so cheap, isn't it?
It feels that way.
In the modern day, that's like, you can get a backup centre back for 30 million quid, let alone a potentially starting number 9, which is the most expensive position to fill in Europe. And I know it shouldn't necessarily matter, but in terms of resale value, he's English. So you're probably going to get your 30 million back even if he scores 7 goals next season. Yeah. And he's 22. Like, it's a mad sort of set of traits and characteristics that this deal has that, basically everyone in the Premier League would want him. And they can all afford him. So, I can see that being a trickier one. Do you think then that United do have any sort of advantage on that front? Because obviously we want him, but is there any indication that he'd want to join us?
Well, I think he'd certainly be open to it. You've been at Ipswich. Going to United is just such a huge, club, huge platform to perform at. He's obviously been in Manchester previously with Man City, so those connections are still there. Jason Wilcox was academy director when they signed Liam Delap from Derby County, so you've got that connection as well with the obviously current technical director at United. So I think they would certainly present a compelling case for him to come to the club. But I don't know exactly which way it's going to go. I just sense that is somebody that they are, making an effort to go for.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I feel like I say this all the time when we chat to you, but it is a signing that I'm sort of warming to as well, because you look at what he's about, and when we've played against him, he's been an handful, and he's looked.
Feels a bit of a throwback, doesn't he? And you want that kind of aggression, running in behind. What they could say to him is, you obviously suit very well what Amorim wants. When we looked at, we had a piece on The Athletic when I think we first linked Liam Delap with United and compared his running approach to Victor Gyökeres, for example, and they do map quite similarly. So you've clearly they can show him, listen, this is what he did with Victor Gyökeres at Sporting. We can obviously do what we think the same at United. It is the appeal of United is huge, I would say, for the kind of profile that you get, and then the point of being that guy that can actually really, hopefully, re-energise this team with goal scoring, so that is surely going to be an appealing prospect for a player.
I mean, you look at the things that he excels at. It is carrying distance, progressive carries into the final third, take-ons attempted, successful take-ons. He's good with the ball at his feet, which I think is a bit of a departure from Højlund, who at times looks a little bit clunky. He's almost better arriving on the ball than having the ball at his feet. And I think if you want to be able to, I remember at Sporting when we were doing a lot of the sort of the scouting and looking at the tactics that Amrim had, he likes his 10s and even his centre-backs to play the ball directly into the feet of his striker, then lay it off to the number 10s, maybe out wide and cut it back. We can't really do that with Højlund because his first touch in his build-up play, I don't think is sort of tight enough. And you look at the numbers for, basically Liam Delap on the ball, and like you said, that's not even including his running in behind. He can do that a lot better, so I think we could see a different style of build-up, and him and sort of Lissandro Martin, as you can already imagine, that pass straight into his feet,
nice.
Lay it off, spin round, and we're through on goal. So yeah, I like him, and the more I look at him and the more I look at what he's about, the more I'm keen on that transfer personally, and for the money as well. There's no one can possibly say what a waste of money, because even if he gets 4 goals for 30 million quid, like, you don't get anything for that anymore. Literally, you do not get strikers for 30 million quid.
I think if you said you could get 2 players that are now combined scored 27 goals in the Premier League this season for 92.5 million quid, that is a pretty good ratio. 25, 22, it feels like a good balance between the two kind of characters, the two qualities. Obviously, we don't know exactly what's going to happen, but that's clearly the intention. Obviously, there will be associated fees as well, agents and whatnot, and I imagine they might be sort of substantial given the lower cost of the actual transfer fee. But that being said, I still think that is a pretty good package for United if they can pull it off.
Yeah. Is there any other names being mentioned about Laurie? Because it does seem everything's focused at the minute on Cunha and Delap.
Yeah,
and any names that would sort of pop up, like Osimhen was one doing the rounds again, but then it sort of got dismissed. I think Ornstein, your colleague, was like, "Don't get excited, that ain't happening."
Yeah, I think there was a period a few weeks ago where certainly conversations I was having around the situation were that, could there be a swap done? That was kind of what was being spoken about. So obviously Napoli had interest in Alejandro Garnacho. I think even Rasmus Højlund's been linked as well, hasn't he, in different reports. But would that be something that United could do? So those people weren't saying to me, not going to happen, ignore it. So that was kind of leading me to think, okay, let's sort of keep that on the back burner almost. But I knew that the salary that he was going to be asking for was beyond really what United were willing to do. Obviously, you've got Delap, and I think Cunha's on a decent wage at Wolves, to be fair, something like 150 grand a week. So they're obviously going to have to, at least pay him that, and then probably a bit more given the scale of the transfer. So that's something to be considered. But I think Osimhen maybe was even more than that, that he was after. So all told, that was going to be a very expensive transfer. So I think as the weeks have progressed, I think they've realised that, or they've decided maybe that that's going to be one that they'll just park for the time being. I don't sense that that's going to be one that they're going to pursue. Certainly the Delap approach feels more live to me.
I like that we've got these sort of strong targets, and in the case of Cunha, by the sound of it, it's not a million miles away from being done or agreed, should we say. The Delap one may be a little bit further away. Should there be any concern, do you think, at the sort of narrowness of our approach? Because I think in the past it seemed like we would go for one particular player, and if we didn't get them, we left looking like idiots. And obviously more recently the Frenkie de Jong one is one that springs to mind. Spent all summer chasing the guy, and then don't get him. We get a 29-year-old Casemiro who was great for a season, and then it's been very much up and down since. I like the focus, but do you think there are more names on the back burner that we aren't addressing, or do you think we're being a little bit too narrow here?
Yeah, they've had a look at others, haven't they? I mean, we mentioned Antoine Semenyo, I think. Previously, he goes and scores against United.
Obviously.
So, of course,
had to happen, didn't it? You see that one coming.
In front of Sir Jim Ratcliffe, so he's thinking, maybe we should go for this guy. I don't know. But I think Tyler Dibbling also has sort of been linked. I mean, that would be a riskier one for me. He's obviously a very talented player, but another teenager, into this situation. So I think there are other options. I suppose the difference with Frenkie de Jong was that was clearly somebody that Ten Hag felt was integral, that particular person, to his system and ways of playing. He felt he was gettable. In the end, he wasn't. I don't think. Maybe there's a time where he could have been persuaded, but ultimately he wanted to stay at Barcelona, and that clearly should have been a transfer that they moved on from quicker than they did do.
Yeah.
The difference, I suppose, with these two is that you feel like both players would be up for coming if the right proposal was made. So
Okay.
whereas the Young thing always felt maybe a distant prospect, these two are very real.
Because that one, when you were trying to pull someone away from their dream club.
Yeah.
Whereas, no disrespect to Wolves and
Yeah.
Ipswich respectively, but you can't imagine that Cunha and Delap see this as their final destination
No.
as
Yeah.
a player. They clearly both want to leave or
Yeah.
are up for leaving. Just to move on a little bit then, because you wrote an article about the Bournemouth game and the response. A lot of it was centred around this week for Man United. It's obvious how important this week is, but do you sense anything at all in terms of the pressure getting to the players or the manager? Do you think there's an element of concern around that, or do you just think United are preparing properly, resting players here and there? How do you see this this week unfolding?
Yeah, I just thought watching the whole picture unfold at the Vitality Stadium, obviously it's a very close stadium, you can see a lot more of what is going on the dugout, and Amorim was clearly wearing the game clearly. It was more so when they were down to 10 men, Bournemouth, and he was making substitutions and the players were kind of a little bit quizzical over where exactly do you want us to play, and he was kind of making a conversation with Bruno Fernandes or Rasmus Højlund. He was kind of calling him across to his side, or Manuel Ugarte. I still couldn't quite figure out whether Ugarte was a sort of centre back or kind of midfielder, and Luke Shaw was whether he was a centre back or wing back. And anyway, I suppose it didn't really matter, but the kind of exasperation at times it looked like from Amorim was explained afterwards. I sort of asked him about it. He said, I just wanted to make sure that they didn't concede on the counter, really, and they were aware of that prospect, because at one point there was that kind of big gap in the midfield, and so that might not feel that important in that particular moment, but I suppose the wider picture is the fact that that might well be the case against Athletic Club, who are based in Bilbao.
Right, thank you.
Try that.
Make it out.
It might get strained, like it did against Lyon. Clearly,
Yeah.
There might be elements where it's a bit freestyle. Players are in positions that they haven't played before, as Amorim said after the game.
Yep.
So having that kind of clarity, at least, having that trial run maybe is a useful thing. But equally, it felt even in that moment that Amorim was getting emotional about it, and he is. He wears his heart on his sleeve. He feels the game absolutely. He kicks every ball. It feels like he crouches down or he's kind of got his arms out. So that's the kind of way that he is a head coach, and so I don't know if the pressure was really getting to anybody as such. It was just clearly, even though this game doesn't mean all that much in the Premier League, as you said, 15th to 14th, it nudged them. The context of the week, it did mean something, because you've got players that you don't want to get injured, you've got a momentum that you want to try and build, at least even with a last minute equaliser. At least that's something that the players kept trying. It's not like they're giving up. So I think that's what coloured the atmosphere at the place.
Just on that, I think you mentioned about the substitutions. I think you sort of used the word like rapping, like almost with Mainu, Maguire, and was it Casemiro on like the 65th minute? Yeah. Did that feel like to you, looking ahead to Thursday, is that what that was about purely?
So.
Just like that we're going to need them on Thursday, and that's.
I assume they were
behind
pre-planned substitutions. He often talks, doesn't he, about in terms when he looks at his bench, and we sort of ask, why didn't you include some youngsters on your bench maybe, and he's like, well, I've actually planned out the substitutions that I'm probably going to make, and we visualised different scenarios and who we'd put on in those circumstances. So I think that was just purely a case of they've done the 65 minutes, they've got the kind of energy in their legs, they've got the muscle memory for Thursday of playing a match, so the match sharpness isn't going to dip, and let's get them off and get them in with some warm bath, I guess.
Just one final thing for me on the Bournemouth game, and it's just a quick aside. What did you make of Mount? What have you made of him recently? Because there's some positives there. I'm just still waiting for him to get going. He's another one. I'm like with Højlund, I'm willing him. Come on, just you know what I mean. I want to see something from him, and like the big result against Lyon. Obviously, the focus on Maguire and Mainu, and it's like I feel like he needs a moment like that. So I just wanted to see what you thought about Mount recently.
Well, Ian, Andy and Carl on Talk of the Devils have been kind of winding me up about it, because I've been sort of putting him in my predicted lineups for like about a month, and sort of saying,
all guilty of that.
Listen, give him a go from the start. I don't know. Surely at this point he must be fit enough to start a game. Like I said, I think it must be a selection thing from Amorim. But I just feel like he keeps getting chances. He doesn't have that much time on the pitch. Forrest, shot after 30 seconds or something. Obviously the one at Bournemouth that was just deflected wide, so he's getting close with the chances. Okay, against Wolves he skies one, right? He should really finish that at least on target, but at least he's getting in those positions, and the run for that particular chance he pulls back, doesn't he, quite cleverly, so Garnacho can pick him out. So I just feel like he's got that intelligence and he's got the technique to actually finish these chances. I think he's waiting for he's not waiting, but I think there's a moment brewing for him, that could actually then just rocket fuel.
That's what I feel like he needs.
Weirdly, and again, I know a lot of people don't like XG, but you mentioned the chances. He's in the top 11% for expected goals, non-penalty expected goals for his position. And yet
in the Premier League,
in the top 5 leagues. So he's
explain
getting
this one to me.
So
right?
he's getting
the top 11%.
So he's getting 0.39 expected goals per 90 minutes
this season.
In the last year, yeah.
Right.
So larger this season, which puts him in the top 11% of all attacking midfielders.
Right.
And yet he scored no goals.
Yeah.
So, but like you said, and I think people say this with Garnacho, and I do as well. The fact that he gets so many chances, obviously at some point you can't just be a player that gets chances and misses them your whole career. But there are positive signs there, like you mentioned, of like maybe something is brewing here. He is getting in those good areas that sometimes his sort of teammates aren't getting in. And you look at his defensive numbers, that's kind of where he shines. But again, we need someone who can score goals and put the ball in the back of the net. But in terms of tackling and winning the ball back and all that sort of stuff,
he takes the foul, doesn't he? The yellow card.
He loves his foul, doesn't he, old Mason? Hey, he's always got a foul in him.
Yeah, so
I just quite like the way he plays, but I accept that that's not good enough for what United bought him for and what they've wanted. He's obviously needed a run. He wouldn't have wanted to be injured as long as he's been. I'm sure they've been scrutinising that a lot at United to figure out what's been going on, and maybe that's why he's been still cautious with him. I mean, Luke's
so long to bring him back.
Yeah, and then even now he's not started still, as he's sending him on. I mean, the Luke Shaw thing, Amorim said afterwards, wasn't planned to play him for full 90 minutes. They're kind of in the similar bracket, I would say, both of them, in terms of United needing to be careful with them. And again, it probably wasn't his best game, was it, Luke Shaw? And same at Lyon, although against Lyon he wasn't supposed to come on. It was only because Mazraoui had to leave and then Lindelof had to leave. It was like this crazy domino effect.
Do we know what happened with Mazraoui there? Because Lindelof, I know his son had a fall, didn't he?
Yeah, I think a personal thing with Mazraoui as well, but fine, not serious.
Okay, good. Yeah, I was just thinking because they announced the Lindelof one and that was pretty serious, but obviously...
Well, that was because his wife did the Instagram post, didn't she? So I think if Mazraoui wants to tell people, he can, can't he? But I think they're kind of keeping it private for the time being.
Okay, but nothing that we need to be too...
Okay,
that's good to know. Let's move on to this other article that you wrote, because I think it's really interesting, this. So United's... the title is Man United Director of Scouting leaving club amid department cutbacks. Obviously, cutbacks have been a huge feature of the Ineos regime, and yet so has criticising and scrutinising how United recruit people by Jim Ratcliffe. He spoke about us not having a data department, and I know scouts and data aren't, maybe they're two sides of the same coin, but they're not the same thing. But what does this sort of suggest about Amorim's kind of vision for how United recruit players? If on the one hand you're criticising a big portion of how we do it in terms of the data, and then on the other hand you're sacking scouts, where is he trying to find the line here? What's he trying to build here, do you think?
Well, in terms of Ratcliffe's view of it, I think, he's been very strong, hasn't he, on the data department. I would possibly, I don't know, I'd just question that a little bit, because clearly United have been behind the curve on data. They appointed Dominic Jordan as head of data department, basically. He's left now, but there's people still there that I think are pretty competent, in terms of actually analysing things. It's just whether they need a bit of leadership on that front and done in the right way. I think there was never really, I don't think data was ever used properly at United. I think it kind of, it got lost in the, sort of immediacy of needing players for the here and now, and a manager has his own say. Ruben Amorim will certainly have his own say as well. So that's still an area that needs to be worked out. Clearly, they're nowhere near the level of Liverpool, for example. I would argue, who have been doing it really well, and they've got that it's a crucial element of it where you might propose a player or the data team might suggest this player's actually got some good numbers behind the scenes. It's, are they looking at the right thing, and are they able then to convince people with the decision-making capacity to go and sign that player? The Mo Salah one is the kind of clearest example, isn't it, at Liverpool, where Jurgen Klopp wanted Julian Brandt, but then they said, actually, if you looked at Mo Salah's numbers, and he got on board with it, and they managed to do that deal, and look at how well that's done. So you need that connection between the different departments. And then with the scouting, I mean, yeah, I've done pieces before where it's certainly been put to me that there's been a global army of scouts, too many potentially, or certainly too many to the point where, you know, information is sort of lost in the ether at United. Where does it actually go? Who actually acts on it? So, I mean, a couple of years ago, I think they had something like 140 scouts. So I think it was 50 full-time and 90 casual. So that's a lot of people to kind of funnel data into. Trackerman, which was their bespoke system, hundreds of players across the world, but were they then acted on? You know, who made the calls, basically? So I think that's been a fair thing to scrutinise. Clearly, you know, John Murtagh as football director, he left the club, you know, when Ratcliffe, you know, got his hands on it properly. I think that was probably always going to happen, given the reshaping that they wanted to do, and he was, you know, one of the architects of Project Bethlehem, which was the kind of restructuring of United's scouting department.
You love all that, don't you?
Honestly, forget trophies and winning football matches. I love the project names. Like,
United are top tier for project names.
Project number 1 was it? Or
Project 100?
100 or...
Well, what was
it's Project 150.
Sorry.
And Mission 21. And
that was in
Mission
21. Sorry, forgive me.
There was
Project
also,
Bethlehem's right up there.
I think there was Project 7? And that was the original project to get Jadon Sancho to the club from Borussia Dortmund. I think that was it. So he was supposed to get the number 7.
Project Bethlehem is absolutely fantastic.
So Project Bethlehem. So you're thinking
that feels like how we entered like the Iraq War or something. It's such a highfalutin, like, what shock and awe. They're like Project Bethlehem. Who do we think we are?
Like with the CIA or something.
New Testament.
Top secret code name. Project Bethlehem.
If you think that Sir Alex Ferguson is some kind of deity, then his departure needed something of that kind of biblical quality to
stature,
change and reshape United.
It is funny though, isn't it?
And he took so much with him, didn't he, Fergie? The connections, the knowledge, the experience, but United
respect as well.
Respect, Well, obviously, you know, being able to sign players when you're a dominant team is much easier than when you're in this position that United are in. Obviously, they've got themselves into this position, but that is a context to consider. And clearly, United needed to, you know, reshape things. But a lot of people, you know, people left the club that felt that they could identify a United player and knew what it was to win. And then the sort of scope, the kind of DNA for a United player changed because, you know, and for what reason people weren't entirely sure. So there's been a lot of, it was quite heated actually between people that probably aligned to Ferguson and then the newer brigade that came in. So I think, so Steve Brown, director of scouting, came to the club. He'd worked with Murtagh at Everton, so that those two were the kind of, you know, the main sort of integral figures behind this, you know, tasked by Ed Woodward to reshape the scouting department. People would say that you're looking at too many players, for example, you know, when it was Aaron Wan-Bissaka, 804 right backs, you know, okay, 799 of them probably aren't good enough to play for United, so what are you doing in that situation? Other big name scouts left the club because they were perhaps being, in the eyes of the people that were making the calls, too negative about what it took to bring a player to the club. So Jim Lawler, for example, signed players under Fergie. Vidic was one of them, but he left the club, in my eyes, from speaking to people, because he was perhaps being critical. But I think people that have worked at the club would say that Fergie always asked them to bring players that could play for United, never bring me a bad player. So the kind of quality control was what, I think in his eyes, he was bringing. So anyway, you bring it now to the current situation. Steve Brown had survived for this long, but I think it always felt that maybe with the reshaping of the executive, it was always going to end up that he would depart. He was offered a new role, but it was underneath Jason Wilcox, technical director, and Christopher Vivell, director of recruitment. So I think for someone of his experience and the point at which he was in his career, he didn't feel that was suitable, so he took the decision to leave the club at the end of June it'll be. So and that then aligns with the scouting numbers coming down again, so I think they're only at about 80 now actually. So even before Ratcliffe, I think United were adjusting the numbers that were being brought into the club in terms of scouting.
We said in the article, United have a global army of around 80 scouts, and Ratcliffe has made it clear he feels this number is too high.
Yeah.
Is that in sort of comparison?
Just feels a bit random, that, doesn't it?
I know,
How many? Too many.
Like, is that in comparison to other clubs? Do you know?
I think
like
it is more than other clubs. Yeah,
I
think hopefully I'm not speaking out of turn, but I read somewhere that maybe Liverpool have like 15 or so.
15.
Yeah. So obviously there's different ways of maybe counting them.
Well, those 65 are really pulling their weight in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
The thing is, you want information. You want people on the ground giving you first-hand accounts, don't you? But then it's trusting those people, being like, okay, this guy's actually told me that, so I'm going to go and act on that. Whereas if you've got so many voices, how do you then organise that into a clear
Do you know sometimes when you go to a
process
restaurant and they give you the menu and it's got like 15 pages?
Too many options.
How can you possibly do a burrito well and do a club sandwich well? Like, they're two completely different foods. Maybe it's that.
Yeah.
Maybe sometimes you need, it's a set menu. So you're having these 4 dishes, whether you like it or not. That's the salad,
Breakfast,
Julian.
dinner,
I feel like you're hungry.
breakfast, dinner,
equate.
Maybe sometimes you need a streamlined menu, but done by people you trust, rather than bloody hell tacos and
I think
curry
that's it
on the same menu. I don't know what to do with myself.
Yeah. I mean, Liverpool's head scouts, Dave Fallows and Barry Hunter, they I think one of them's left now, but they had the kind of authority to go and meet agents, for example, as well, as part of their job, and kind of start the conversations to get these deals done. So different clubs have different ways of doing it, and I'm not saying that there's only one way to skin a cat, sign a player, but clearly United's recruitment has underwhelmed, hasn't it? So you can understand why there's been changes made. But I do think it also boils down to cost cutting from Ratcliffe. I think that's his agenda. He has that mentality at all his companies that he's had with Ineos to cut costs. So if that happens to align with a department that perhaps does need a bit of a shake-up, then he's happy at that.
Is there any reason you feel like fans should be concerned about this? Because at one point you're hearing we're going to be looking at South America more. We're going to be trying to sign younger players more, the likes of Seka Kone and players like that who we've scouted and brought in. And then the next thing you're hearing, we're getting rid of a load of scouts.
Yeah.
Do you think there is a reason to be concerned, or do you think it makes sense from what you gather?
It depends, doesn't it? I mean, obviously the people that are in charge now, this is on them to say that they do know better, and we have a clearer way of working. So, but I think you can have concern, certainly, because I don't know what the right number of scouts is.
No, I'm the same. I was hoping you could tell me, because you hear fewer scouts and you think nightmare, but then you're making a point. Well, Liverpool have got a lot less scouts, a lot fewer scouts, and they've done all right, haven't they, with signings. And
if you've got the right data department that they can then maybe identify players that then you go and say, right, well, you go and actually watch this player in first hand, then more tailored, rather than just going to loads of matches on the whim of, okay, this second division Uruguayan match, let's see if there's anyone available. I think there was certain occasions of that happening in the last few years where scouts would be like, why am I at this game? So if you're able to actually tailor it more, be more precise with who you're watching and when, then maybe there's a reason to be encouraged by that. But I accept it feels counterintuitive in a way.
There was always that rumour, wasn't there? I don't know if it's true, that they went to watch a game in Brazil, whatever it was, and scouted Andreas Pereira by accident.
That's actually one of the stories.
Yeah, like he was on loan then, they were like, you want to sign him? He's like,
when he was at United.
Right. Yeah, like, they were like,
Marshall, wasn't there, where they
I don't know how true all these rumours were.
When I looked at him playing for Sevilla, and do you really need to watch him play for Sevilla?
How's he getting on? With the scouting thing, again, back to sort of Ratcliffe's quotes, and maybe I don't want to say it's contradictory, but there is an element of like, okay, but then why aren't you doing something about it? So he's spoken about the data department, and then he said, we don't really have a data department, we have Jason Wilcox eyes. which is a very interesting thing to say.
Nice.
It's almost like a sort of medieval king, like he's got them on sticks outside the front of the portcullis. Like,
Yeah, expecting that when you came on this podcast today. We had the portcullis.
Jason Wilcox's eyes, and his head will be sent back to his kingdom.
Have you been watching Game of Thrones?
No, but Ronaldo hasn't. We've been talking about it.
There we go.
So you can usually tell I'm hungry, and Ronaldo's been watching Game of Thrones. No, so, but I do think that on one hand you think, all right, well he's got. If I'm Jason Wilcox, I'm probably thinking, my eyes might get fucking cut out here if I don't get this right. Because look what happened to Dan Ashworth. You know, he was meant to do something, and when he was relied upon and it didn't work the way he wanted, he was gone. You know, Jim Ratcliffe's basically coming out and saying that multi-million pound data department that everyone else is like winning Premier Leagues with, we've just got one bloke. Like, how much pressure is on Wilcox, and are they endeavouring to change that?
I think Ratcliffe has quite a lot of artistry with some of the stuff that he says.
Yeah.
You know, like United going bust, not going to happen. So you kind of have to allow for a little bit of license with the guy that owns the club. But so like I said, there's a data department of 4 people. Jason Wilcox, I think, has got a big influence at the club. I think he is seen as the guy that, you know, understands football very well, speaks to Amarin every day, speaks to Barada, speaks to Ratcliffe, you know, has that link point, and that's a big role for him. You know, he's won the title with Blackburn Rovers, for example. He clearly absolutely knows the game, but it's a new role for him at a scale of club like United. Obviously he had it at Southampton, and he was academy director at Man City for several years. So, and you're seeing that, aren't you, with the kind of players that United are going for again, you know, younger, emerging talent. They've pivoted to that, partly because I think it's a decision that they want to, but also, you know, you've got to think about the finances. So, and it's also in Wilcox's wheelhouse. So, yeah, I think that's maybe why Ratcliffe was mentioning Wilcox. But they are clearly they're going to make some appointments in the data side of things. I'm pretty sure of it.
How do you sort of assess morale at the club at the minute? Because I was speaking to a few people this week who were finding out whether they still had a job. So we probably know some of the same people, but across the board, people working in different departments at United. I think there was some meetings going on this week, which is never great, is it, when you don't know what your future holds? How do you assess it all? Do you get an impression of what the morale's like?
I just think it's low, right? I mean, depends who you speak to.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, some people say it's, you know, lower than low. I don't think anyone is happy, because how can you be? The security of your job isn't there. It's been this kind of low level, stalking of your future for the past year, really, where the first set of redundancies was supposed to be it. They've changed their minds, or, you know, maybe they weren't originally wholly truthful. So either way, it's not great. And so, yeah, as you've said there, they're having these conversations this week, aren't they? They're finding out, HR are informing people who's at risk. I certainly think there's emotions running high on that from across different departments of the club. You know, it's something like 150 to 200 jobs are going to be lost. So it's, you know, significant. So if you add in the 250 from before, it's sort
massive.
of a third of the workforce at United.
It's absolutely massive. That.
Sad to say, innit?
Yeah.
I do feel for people, man, who thought they, you know, join United, you got a job for life, it's your club. A lot of people are United fans, and it's like, I'm working at United, I've made it, kind of thing.
And they will have taken, some people certainly will have taken lower salaries because it's United. Because of the love. And I'm not saying that you therefore just get a job for life because you're a United fan. You've got to still do the job well.
Yeah.
And there's got to be that competitive tension there, I think. But at the same time, there's a way of doing things, and I think there's certainly a lot of heartache over how it's going forward.
Tough one. Let's move on a little bit and talk a bit about some outs, because I do think that is always worth mentioning. You mentioned that maybe Delap and Cunha specifically aren't wholly or even remotely reliant on selling players based on those sort of credit facilities and 95 million in cash that we might have, but we do need to sell players. There's like in the case of Rashford, Sancho and Antony in particular, that is in an alternate reality a world-class front line that United have got there. Isn't it, and instead of it being a world-class front line, it is possibly the largest problem at the club. Yeah, which is a bizarre situation to be in. You know, what is the understanding on Rashford? To me, just from the outside, it looks like I can't see him going to Villa permanently. I don't know why. The way everyone's speaking about it feels that he'll make his mind up in da-da-da. So, you know, those three in particular, What do you think's happening with them, and how do you see this unfolding over the summer?
I think the Rashford one is the most interesting, right? Because he's now injured. We think for the rest of the season with the hamstring problem. Being looked after by Villa, and I think Emery was sort of saying we'll take it on a match by match basis, but it feels like it's going to be, one of those that is too much for him to come back by the end of the season. It's only 4 games left, right, in the Premier League.
Maybe if they had a Champions League final, he could have sort of found a way.
Because the last game is against us, isn't it, as well?
Yes,
and so he's not eligible for that.
Yeah,
and I think there's Spurs. And I think Spurs were trying to get that move, weren't they? Because they're hoping they've got the Europa League final, and Villa are like having none of it.
Oh right, yeah, they are. Yeah, it's all a bit.
So it's a bit of a weird situation, but it does feel like you say, Joe, he's chances are he's not going to play for Villa again, but is he going to, unless he signs for them?
Which, it's been fascinating to watch that at Villa, because, for him to start both Champions League games against PSG and Ollie Watkins to be on the bench, I was like, what is going on here? Like, he's on loan. Watkins is your guy that's been performing for years, and to my knowledge has been pretty good still. Okay, Rashford brings something else, but so I don't know whether that was Emery's play to Rashford to try and get him for next season.
Did you watch that second leg?
He was brilliant the second half.
Yeah, and he took him off like. I just thought it was all a bit weird.
That was weird.
Why
take him off?
It's like first half he was quiet, granted. Second half he was flying, causing him all sorts of problems. And then he took him off, and Watkins never really got going. I know you can't predict that, but it just seemed a bit of a...
Again, maybe it was one that he had in his mind preset, and he knew that Watkins obviously needed to go on. But you just think, can you change the formation and have them both on?
Yeah.
But it's funny that he
doesn't like playing them both at the same time.
No, he started him... Did they start one? Did they play any matches where Rashford was on the left and Watkins was up top? But he clearly changed his mind on that. And I thought Rashford was just going to be on the left, but he prefers that player to kind of be more inside, doesn't he? Whereas Rashford likes to be on the outside and cut in. So then he decided that it's either one or the other up top, and Watkins was the fall guy. And he came out, didn't he, afterwards in between one of the games and said I was fuming to be left out. And I was like, I can understand that.
He's been like one of the main talisman, or potentially the talisman of this sort of Villa revival. And yet, like you said, a lone guy is coming in and taking his place.
What happens with Watkins in the summer? Obviously, So Rashford though is what we're sort of focused on, and clearly Villa have got that option to buy for 40 million. So they could say to United, here you go, 40 million, we'll have him. But then Rashford obviously has the choice to join Villa or not. There have to be conversations about his contract. He's obviously on a very significant salary at United. Villa can't compensate that. So if he was to go, United would have to come to an agreement with him over the rest of his contract. So that's going to cost money. And clearly, even when he joined Villa, he sort of said, I'm here for a short period and let's see. He obviously wanted Barcelona in January, who were sort of there, but not at the price that was obviously being quoted. So let's see who comes in for him in the summer. But I think everybody is a bit disappointed now that he's injured, because I think United would have wanted him to finish the season strongly, get his profile out there. He would have wanted that. Villa would have wanted that to try and get in the Champions League. And I think if they don't get in the Champions League, Villa, that even makes signing Rashford permanently a real tricky one, because they are going to have to tighten the belts.
They had a bit of a nightmare, hadn't they, Villa, recently?
In terms of
just
last 10 days.
Out of the Champions League.
Yeah, it was
last minute loss to City, and then losing
against Palace.
Yeah, just a horrendous.
Bullied them, didn't they, that game?
Yeah, it was
season over potentially in a week.
And
just all going wrong.
Like the Watkins thing, I'm like, okay, well that's maybe why you're starting Rashford occasionally. On
to Sancho then.
Yeah.
Again, another different situation, but no less complex and bizarre. Chelsea have got an obligation to buy. Yeah. Contractually, they have to buy him. Yeah. But they might not.
Yeah. They can pay a £5 million fee to not
Why have we
him.
got that in there? Why isn't the fee to not buy him the same as the transfer fee? Would Chelsea have just not signed it? There's an obligation to buy, but not really. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I suppose, but there is, but then there's an insurance policy against it. So, and one of the issues, I suppose, here is, again, the contract, right? So I don't know, I could be wrong here, but I suspect that Sancho didn't agree with Chelsea, his personal terms, in the event of them signing him permanently, because then you get into this point where can Chelsea actually, maybe they want to trigger it. I suspect that maybe they've been having second thoughts about it anyway, because that's where these stories have clearly been emanating from, that they might not do it. But they would still have to come to an agreement on his contract, and if they can't, then what happens? Do they still have to pay 25 million quid and it doesn't play for them?
It's a weird one with Chelsea because it just feels like, and this just feels like a constant with Chelsea since Abramovich was there, just everything seems up in the air. Like, what's going to happen with Maresca? Even his future doesn't seem as secure as perhaps it should.
A lot of Chelsea fans hate him.
Yeah, and also he obviously plays Sancho a lot. Yeah, he plays Sancho a lot, but if he's not going to be there, there's that all the things. What's happening with Jadon Sancho? What's happening with signings? Are they going to bring in more players in the summer? Are they going to sign Garnacho or Delap? Do you know what I mean? It all feels like you just don't know what is going on at Chelsea. So nothing seems off the table for me whenever I think of Chelsea.
And it all stems from the ownership, right? Clearly there's tension, to say the least, between the two main protagonists up there. So yeah, that clearly then emanates down. You've got two sporting directors, that's two heads rather than one that have kind of got equal billing. Yeah, it feels a right mess.
Yeah.
I guess that then means for United, what do they do with Sancho? I mean, maybe try to spin it positively. They get 5 million from Chelsea if they don't sign him, and then maybe they can sell him for 30 million. I mean, he's actually played at least more than he had done when he
plays most games.
Yeah, he's played a lot of games.
So he's had that run, so you're sort of thinking maybe more teams would come to the table in that scenario.
I hope so, because I feel like with Sancho and with Rashford, players that obviously on their day are mint or whatever, but it's time for us to move on. We need to move on, not just because of the finances, just generally. It's obviously not going to have a happy ending if they come back to United.
Just a couple more names that I do want to go through. Anthony, it seems to be a different case entirely, where he's the club want him. It seems as though Betis they're really keen on him. He's doing really well for them. It seems like he's taken them up a notch. I think since he got there, I think only Barcelona have won more points than Betis in La Liga, which is obviously exceptional. But they don't have the money Chelsea does, and is that going to be a stumbling block there? Do you think there's been talks of maybe another loan for a further season?
Yeah.
Have you heard anything about that, or how this might unfold?
Not heard anything, to be honest, too significant on it. I suppose all I'd say is that clearly they didn't have a buy option or obligation at all in their deal, so it is going to be a kind of clean slate, I suppose. But clearly they've really liked what he's done, and you can see how he would be open to that. The wages thing isn't as significant for him. I don't think he's on crazy amount. Yeah. Although with all these contracts, the irony being, if United qualify for the Champions League, Rashford's earnings go up, Sancho's earnings go up, Anthony's earnings go up.
And they deserve it for what they've done to help us get there.
A curious quirk of financial regulations.
And lastly, Rasmus Højlund, I think, is another one. People don't seem to be able to rule out him leaving in the summer.
Yeah.
Have you heard anything on that front? And we've been linked with other strikers. Presumably, Delap's going to come in ahead of Højlund. What do you think the future holds for Rasmus Højlund?
Yeah, I think it's open. Yeah,
Is it?
I don't think that they have ruled out selling him because it's obviously had a difficult season. He's had a lot of game time. How is it all working? We can all be the judges there. So I think to say that United would absolutely not sell him is wrong. So yeah, again, let's see on that one. Clearly they would need a decent chunk of money back because they signed him for a lot of money, and to avoid a PSR loss on the balance sheet, then there's a certain level that he's got as a book value, and they'd need to sort of surpass that to not have a loss there. So are those clubs available? Again, I don't think the salary's beyond the realms of other clubs. Possibilities, but yeah, it would feel. If Delap comes in, he's obviously going to want to play all the time. What does that mean for Højlund? Is it best if he actually leaves, or do you want a bit of competition there?
I don't want to be left with one striker again.
Yeah.
Højlund leaves and Delap comes in. Great. What if he gets one goal in his first 12 games for United? Then what do you do?
The one striker thing
is
horrendous, and just injuries and stuff.
You'd want a bit of competition as well, pushing each other.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe they would get the best out of each other, learn from each other, grow together, rather than this whole thing of it being, well, he's in, so you've got to leave. I think United need at least a couple of strikers.
100%.
We'll have to wait and see. Right, Laurie, thank you as always. A brilliant bumper episode there.
Bumper. You have to get some
United.
lunch, are you now?
Of course, yeah. I think it's a perfect time to do such a thing. But thank you very much, Laurie, for coming on as always. Thank you, Jay.
No worries, always a pleasure. And don't forget, there's a link in the description to Laurie's articles and his work with The Athletic. Go and check them out. I'm the Talk of the Devils podcast as well, of course.
2 plugs.
Yeah, you got to give that a plug, haven't we?
And finally, as well, make sure you check out Huel as well. The link to them is in the description. Thank you, Laurie. Thank you, Jay. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you in a bit.